Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk about co-parenting. I'm Jan Holland, and I'm delighted to introduce Larissa Dann, who is an advocate for parent effectiveness training, and she's going to be talking about co-parenting in that context. So welcome, Larissa.
Thanks, Jan. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I'm just going to read out a little bit about you before we start. So Larissa is a passionate advocate of a mutually respectful approach to parenting, parent effectiveness training, PET for short. She has implemented these skills in her own parenting and has taught the skills for over 20 years. Many of her participants are from separated families and have included parents that would like to co-parent from the same page, parents in dispute, and step-parents. And for further information, you can visit her Parent Skills website, and we'll talk about that at the end of the session. So Larissa, sometimes for my clients, I've noticed that although there's a parenting plan in place, there may be different rules in each household, and that can often be a cause of a lot of frustration and anger. So how would you address that?
First of all, I think by acknowledging that to yourself that it's really tricky, and thinking about what it is that you're feeling, I suppose, in terms of annoyance or anxiety about how it is for you. And then most importantly, I would also be thinking about how it is for the child. So the skills that I use and teach are really quite child and parent focused. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about now is initially the parent is the one that is upset because they can see a difference and they think they might think, well, the way that we run things in this household, my children will be better off if it was both the same. Yeah. For the child, it's the child who's really experiencing this as well. So the child has to move, your child is moving from one household to the other. And I think it can help to change the way that you think about it, as well as your own frustration, also seeing how it is for the child. Mm. The way that, when I say we, as in that would be the PET approach. Yes. And that is to sort of recognize that you as the parent might have an issue, might have a problem, and that's the way that, your child's maybe behaving a bit differently when they come to your place, mm-hmm. from their other parent's place, but also thinking about it from your child's point of view. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can change the whole perspective. So if you think about it, your child has spent some time with the other parent, yes. And now what they're doing is transitioning. And they're moving from one house to another, and it's always a wrench. I think, yes. To go from one household to another, from one way things were to another place. And if you think about it, your children transition when they go to school and when they come home, yes. And you've probably been subject to the child that was wonderful at school, and the teachers has no problem with your child at school, but they come home and let it out. Yes. And then you have to, and that's because you're their safe space. Yes. So and they're also transitioning between school and home. Children have an ability also to know how to act differently in different situations. So they have I've completely forgotten it, but they have the ability. So if they know they can act differently at their grandparents than when they're with you. Yes. So they have. So our kids are experiencing different things all the time. But if you create a safe space for them, then if they act out, if that's what you want to call it, when they come from one household to another, then if you can be their safe space, they can be who they need to be. And at the same time, you can hold them emotionally in an emotional safe space, and maybe physically, and then maybe that will help them through the transition to work to be with you again. The skills that I think are really important to create that safe space for your child, the main skill is a skill we call active listening. Right. And that would be, what that is trying to understand what your child's experience is. So thinking about, well, what might they be feeling, even if they come home and they stamp their feet and they grump and they're silent and they go into their room. Yes. So to me, that's saying that for some reason your child's unhappy. Yes. And it's important to differentiate between your child's unhappy to the child's having a go at you. Yes. It's not about you. It's really about the child and what they're experiencing. So I think something that I've realized that's really important is to not take things personally. Yes. You know, so thinking, okay, my child has a need. Another aspect of PE2 that for me helps me really move out of my stuff again and seeing things from my child's point of view is the realization that children do not misbehave. They instead behave to meet a need. Yes. So when my child comes home and is grumpy and doesn't want to communicate with me, they're not saying, hey, they're not telling me I hate you. They're saying something about themselves. They're saying, I don't know, I'm struggling. I don't really know how to cope with these changes in my life. Something might have happened in the other household. Something might be going to happen tomorrow at school. We don't know. We can never know what their problem is in advance. But if we create a safe space for them to talk to, so with the active listening, it would be saying something like initiating what you see in their behaviour. So it might be, I can see that you're quiet. It seems that you're unhappy. It seems that you're upset at the moment and you don't want to talk. So it's about what their feeling is and what their behavior is. So acknowledging what their feeling is can be really important to create that safe space. And then they own the conversation. So when you're with them, if they let you in the room with them, and if they invite you to continue the active listening, for me, it's like holding their hand. Yes. And you're not going to lead them where you think they should go. So you don't say, tell me what happened at the, and we might make assumptions. So it's really important, I think, not to make those assumptions. Yes. Because that would mean that we're leading them here or we're leading them over there. Instead, go with them where they are and let them tell you how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. So I think that's a really important safe space to build for them. If their behaviour then is impacting, though, on your household or what you need to do, a second skill that I think is really important. These are all communication skills. So, and they're communication skills that you can use in any part of your life. But in this case, we're looking particularly at with our children and with us, families. So if we think that if their behaviour is impacting on ourselves or maybe on other people in the household, it might be helpful to use an I message after the active listening. So there are 3 parts to the I message. Right. And that would be what their behaviour is, how it's impacting on you, so what the effect on you is and how you feel about it.
Right.
And iMessages take a lot of practice
Mm-hmm.
because it's really important for them not to be blameful. So remember, you've already got a child that might be a little bit vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
feeling, and then we also need to get us, we might be feeling vulnerable too. So we
Yes.
want to keep that communication and we want to keep that relationship. The relationship between you and your children is at the heart of everything that we do.
Yes.
And so
That's fantastic. I love all of those ideas. I mean, especially the first one, when you might be frustrated about the rules in the other household being different from yours. And just to acknowledge that it's actually the child going from one place to the other and that they're transitioning. So to be very mindful of that. And I think if we come from that place rather than our own frustration, I think it helps us a lot as well, just because then our focus changes from ourselves to the child. And then I also love the idea of creating a safe space, because we all need a safe space, the children and us. So if we consciously create that safe space rather than having an emotional reaction, then I think that's really important. So they're really great points. Thank you. And even if one parent practices these skills, I should imagine that it would create a better relationship between the other parent anyway. It would have a ripple effect.
yeah, hopefully if the child, you can use these skills, like I said, with children, but also with the other parent.
Mm-hmm.
And if your child feels perhaps through the active listening, through the safe space that you've created,
Mm-hmm.
they can start to understand themselves as well.
Yes.
Then they can perhaps then cope better if they're finding it difficult to transition
Mm-hmm.
between the two households, or something is happening that they're not quite sure about. So yeah, they need to feel safe. I was thinking, I just wanted to quickly go back to transitioning. Sometimes it can help to think about what it's like for us as adults.
Yes.
So, we can have a really hectic day at work, and then we have to come home and cook dinner. And sometimes we need a little bit of space in between. And I think sometimes people use driving, but if that's happening now, sometimes, we're working at home and we actually don't have a way to transition. But just recognizing that we need that little bit of space to sort of move from high pressure work to being available as a parent.
For sure. No, that's true, isn't it?
I just, for me, it really helps to think about, well, what would it be like for me if I'm an adult? And even the way that we speak to children, it's helpful to think, would we speak like that to our neighbour? Would we speak like that to our friend? So why do we speak differently to our children? What is it that our children are people? For me, that's another really important aspect, is that our children are people and they experience things as we would experience them. They're not another species named children. They're actually people.
Yes. That's fantastic. I think sometimes we do forget that as parents, that we feel that sometimes we have to be in control and so on. And of course, by wanting to be in control, then you start becoming judgmental and emotionally reactive and so on. So, but just to treat them as we would want to be treated, I think is great. And then the other thing about divorce and separation, it can be a very emotionally fraught time. And even some time, like even years down the track, there can be a lot of unresolved emotion between the two parents. And I should imagine that that really does affect the communication between them. So how can parents learn to communicate better in those situations? I'm sure that you've covered some of that already, but maybe just to go over that.
Yeah, I think as these skills again are quite useful for all communication between adults as well. And so I think again, recognizing what is your problem and recognizing that the other person might also have some issues around which we have no idea.
Yes.
And maybe trying to resolve that and using those skills. So if I can give you an example, and this is an example that was relayed to me many years ago. So at the time I was running 2 courses, and I had parents who had amicably parted and were co-parenting. And the mum, but they were doing each were doing the course on a different night. Anyway, in this case, one Friday, I think it was supposed to be Dad was supposed to be picking up the children, but Mum had something happened, and Mum contacted Dad during the afternoon and saying, look, I'm not going to be able to get them there on time. And she's doing this by text, and Dad arcs up. Why can't you're always doing this to me? This is the 5th time it's happened this year. Why can't you get there and why can't you get there on time? And if this continues, I'm going to go back to the family court. So all of this is by text, and Mum realizes that Dad has an issue, that he's quite upset. And for us, that's an indication that the best thing to do is to listen. So by text, she said, you seem really upset with what I've said. It's just too much for me to not have the kids there on time. And she got a text back saying, I've had the worst week. This is just the icing on the cake. I'm not going to take you to court. I was just having a really bad day.
Yes.
And then they stepped into the third major skill that we haven't really talked about, which is problem solving.
Right.
And so they tried to work out how they could, how he could get the kids and she could still do what she needed to do.
Yes.
And so that there was no loss in the relationship. And she said it felt much closer. They understood once she remembered that he had his problems, and that they could then work together for what was best for the child.
Fantastic.
Or the children, I think, in this case.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Thank you. So just being aware and seeing what could be behind the behavior rather than just reacting to the behavior.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to, you can think of an iceberg, and what you see in the iceberg, you just see the tip, and that's the behavior. It might be your ex doing this ex getting upset, might be your children running around the house or screaming or being silent. And that's all that you can see, but we don't know what's happening underneath. We don't know what needs are being met. We don't know what's happened. We don't know if they've been bullied.
Yes, no, that's true. And I also read that Thomas Gordon set up the parent effectiveness training in 1962 and introduced it to the States. And it's been in Australia since the 1970s. And it seems to me that today it's just as relevant as it was back then.
It is so relevant. And I think today there's evidence that backs up what the approach, it was visionary, I think, that in those days, to be child-centered and parent-centered, and to look at the emotions of both parties. So using that being emotionally intelligent and resilience, helping. I think that particularly the listening helps our children develop resilience and the problem solving, because we can help them learn to problem solve for themselves. So again, that's what resilience is about as well, I think. So yeah, I think that evidence that we have today around attachment and the importance of attachment, around like emotional intelligence, empathy, and how that really is important for the growth of our children into adulthood. It's as relevant today as ever it was, but also more validated. I think it's been validated. The approach is more validated now than it was initially, just because of the weight of evidence.
Yes, no, that's wonderful. And just the skills, increased self-awareness, like consciously creating a safe space, consciously listening, and then regulating yourself, like just not reacting, like being more mindful. I think it's all wonderful. And it seems to really dovetail nicely into Daniel Goleman's 5 components of emotional intelligence. And I think they're self-awareness, self-regulation, which you've talked quite a bit about. And then the other 3 are motivation, empathy, and social skills. But if you develop your self-awareness and can regulate your emotions, I mean, your social skills are so much better anyway. So no, that's wonderful. And then the other thing that I loved that I read was that sometimes we see children as problems. So instead of seeing children as the problem, see them as having a problem. And I think just that mind shift in itself would totally change a parent's behavior, because when you see them as a problem, then you're judgmental, you tend to react emotionally towards them. Whereas if you see them as having a problem, then you would want to find the solution, you would want to help them, and you would have more empathy for them. So I love that as well.
I think that that's a great way to encapsulate it, because if we can again separate ourselves and see that children, they're having a problem, and so that rather than reacting, we respond. So I think there's that, there's their behavior, which is their saying that they have a problem. And then by going through the skills, that self-awareness, should I listen? Should I be assertive? We're stretching that time between their behavior and our response. And that alone can shift things so that we're maintaining that relationship rather than arcing up into a conflict. One of the things that we haven't touched on, I just would like to quickly touch on, is conflicts. I've talked about we don't go into conflict, but we do have to. That conflicts are inevitable. And I think that what we look at problem solving with conflict rather than using power, which is, we as parents have inherent power, but it's quite it's important in how we use that power. And the way that we would often use that power is to either reward our children or to punish them so that they do what we want them to do. Without recognizing that they also have needs. And that's often, we can then get that reaction from our children where they rebel and say no, stamp their foot. Whereas if we can remember, something's happening for our kids, they have needs as well, and include them in problem solving. So for me, it would be a way to do that would be to listen, to try and find out what their need is. But also to listen to us. Okay, so what's happening for me? What's my need? Using the skills of listening and assertiveness, so saying what the needs are, and then go into problem solving, which is basically brainstorming with our kids. So it might be, I would like them to go to bed at 8 o'clock, but now they're getting older. They want to go to bed at 8:30. What can we do? Why is there a problem here? And then sort of stating, well, this is why I need you to go to bed at 8. And they say, but I'm much older and my friends, they're watching TV and they're watching, or they're doing this at this time. So I acknowledge that and then say, okay, well, what ideas have you got? Well, let's put them all out on the table and try and work out something that will suit us both.
Yes.
Afterwards, so you might get something that works really well. Well, you think it's ticked all the boxes, but then after a week, no, it's going back to, I want to be awake at 8:30 or even push it out to 9.
Right.
And then you need to come back to the drawing board. And I've realized that that's really important because I think sometimes we can get stuck on that last bit. Okay, they made an agreement, they signed it, now they're not doing it, I'm going to use my power as a parent.
Yes.
And then you come back to that same conflict and rebellion. But if you recognize that I'll just come back again because maybe something's changed for my child, maybe they didn't realize how that it was going to be difficult to be, I don't know, something's changed, but at least coming back there.
Yes. So be happy to review things rather than think that everything is set in stone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to be flexible.
Yes.
And I think it's also really important if we, we do some problem solving, or if we make a mistake, sometimes, like, we're human as parents, we are just human. And one of the aspects that I discovered when I did this course as a parent was that I didn't have to be perfect. I could throw that mantle of perfection aside and just be a human.
Yes.
And as a human, I make mistakes. So I think acknowledging that and letting my child see me as a human, imperfect, also then is freeing for the child, and so our children can say, okay, mum or dad, they don't have them on that pedestal.
Yes.
Because I think that can be a little bit dangerous, because one day you're going to fall off that pedestal.
Of course.
If we allow our children to be also imperfect, and recognize that, then it takes away our expectation. Well, we always will have expectations, but we hopefully won't allow it to become an issue between us as much if we just recognize that each of us make mistakes.
Yes.
And how we deal with that.
Yes. And I think also it allows us to be authentic as people, and it also allows the children to be authentically them as well.
So important.
Yeah,
so important.
That's great. And also, Larissa, I know in a conversation that we had, and you mentioned that sometimes there's a space where there is no problem, and sometimes we forget that, because when we're a bit emotionally overwhelmed or whatever, we think everything's a problem. But if we realize that there are actually parts in the day when there's no problem, and you had a really interesting take on that.
So I think that no problem area, basically, I have to go back to PET again. There's a model in PET, which I think acts as a foundation that really helps you think about whether it's the child that owns the problem, which is when we listen, whether it's me that owns the problem, which is when I need to be assertive, whether we share that problem, and that's the problem solving. But then in the middle, there's an area that you're talking about, that's called the no problem area. And that's a magic area. That's the area where we can just be. We can be there with our children. We can just, there's no conflict. There's just people together.
Yes.
And in that area, we can read together, play games together, talk together. It's family time.
Yes.
That is also a useful time, though. If an issue has happened, or if there's something that you want to bring up that you're concerned about, and you weren't able to bring it up at the time, sometimes you can use that no problem area to address that with your child. It will quickly turn into being a problem, but because, but at least you've brought it up at a time where you're both in that space, and you can preempt it by saying, look, I had a bit of difficulty with the way you spoke to me this morning. I understood that you were highly distressed or annoyed with your sibling or with what had happened recently. I just was unhappy with the way I was spoken to, and I'm just wondering if we can talk about that.
Yes.
And just bringing that up, and then they might say no, or they might say whatever, and then maybe engage. Is that yeah? So
yes, no, that's great. I just thought it was interesting to recognize that there was a space where good things were happening, and that maybe that was a time to enjoy the connection.
It is, and I think once you do recognize it, then you can start to grow it. And the whole aim of these respectful communication skills is to actually grow that area, because there will be less conflict, because you're hearing what's happening for your child and understanding them. They're understanding you. You're not just, as parents, sometimes we just think, they should just be able to tell that I'm cross, and they should be able to know why, but they don't. So, letting them know, and then you're just growing that no problem area, that family time, that just being with time.
Yes, no, that's wonderful. I know that this was titled co-parenting, and we're focused on the children. No, that's great. But what I'm seeing and hearing from parent effectiveness training and the skills that are incorporated there is that if you do focus on the child, then you are a better parent, but also I do think that has a ripple effect for the person that you're co-parenting with. And then if both of them are on the same page with parent effectiveness skills, then all the better. So thank you so much. There was so much value in what you shared with us, and I'm sure that our audience has a lot to think about from that. So Larissa, if people want to find out more about you, how do they do that?
I have a website, www.parentskills, all one word, .com.au. The PET course is available all around Australia and actually around the world, if you like the skills that we've talked about. And you can find out more about your local area by going to etia.org.au.
Right.
And there's an international site as well.
Okay, lovely. Look, thank you so much. That was really wonderful, and I so appreciate you sharing those skills with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for the opportunity, and good luck, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.